Okay, so welcome everybody to our Childhood and Society Special Interest Group seminar on childhoods of the Anthropocenes and ecopedagogy strands. So the focus of our seminar is on ecopedagogies in our commitment to propose pedagogies sensible to the current global challenges, reconsider thinking on children and also childhoods in a broader sense. So to think critically with children and not to do research on children by promoting a childlike engagement with the world. So today's seminars will be presented by the primary education team composed by Victoria De Rijke, Anne Mulligan, Philip Jeffries, Claire Handing, Edina Kulenovic, and Fiona Bailey. The talk deals with how one clump of mushrooms can be a family in shared, linked, and entangled mycorrhizal networks, acting as a kinship, as affinity, interdependent, and connected, or how one plastic bag can support the development of environmental literacy with the opportunity for children to understand the ways that local, regional, and global ecologies interact. Now, before handing to Victoria, I'd just like to remind you to check that you have muted your audio. The seminar will be recorded and will be available on our SERS website. There will be time, of course, at the end for questions, but in the meantime, of course, you can raise them on the chat. And thank you. So I will now hand over to Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you, Abele.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start. So interdisciplinary eco-pedagogies and outdoor learning are the foci today for us to share with you some of the pedagogies that we use in the primary team in order to approach the curriculum in a genuinely broad and balanced way, to embrace the idea that all subjects have relationship, are relational with one another, and that both indoor and outdoor education are also relational. So we're going to sort of share with you a number of micro narratives, which are sort of small scale observations made by us as the team working together and observing one another's lessons and work with students. They may not have large research significance, but as method, we are interested in how that sort of nurtures creative educational values. And the metaphor of the mushroom will come up again as a kind of a form of speculation in mushroom form. It's a sort of reflection on the fact that mushrooms lead entangled lives, as do all of our students and all of us, of course, in the sense that the global ecologies also interact. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour through an outdoor art session that's part of the year one creativity module known as Mud, Glorious Mud. So as with most practical art sessions, the starting point for this activity is to introduce students to artists and artworks. And in terms of the outdoor art, throughout human history, there's always been art outdoors. We have Aboriginal art dating back 80,000 years. We have Neolithic stone circles. We have the Nazca lines, 2,000 years old. And as well as more contemporary artists such as Richard Long and his art made from walking, and Andy Goldsworthy's magical environmental interventions. So these artworks that we introduce to the students, whether they're permanent features, historical features of the landscape, or these more ephemeral environmental happenings, are usually creative expressions of a physical, emotional, and or spiritual connection with the land and a deep sense of place. Whilst the making of these artworks is a creative act in itself, in its own right, for the artist, there's also a creative, imaginative, and sometimes joyful experience for those who actually happen upon them. You know, who made them, why, what do they mean? And stories emerge from them as we respond to them, as we find them. So, for example, I'm sure some of us have come across groups of cairns and added to them, so they become a field of cairns. You know, so we make up stories and we tell stories of how we found these things. For our students, however, our first years, when it comes to outdoor art, they're often seeing it for the very first time, and they can certainly enjoy and appreciate these examples that we show, but the actual prospect of themselves going outside is another thing altogether. Takes them outside of their comfort zone. Children, on the other hand, relish the opportunity to be outside, and it takes very little encouragement for them to engage in these sort of creative, tactile activities. And every available natural material, sticks, stones, leaves, mud, they will play with them. They will play with the elements. They'll make things with snow. They'll create rain shadows on the ground. And as they make these things, stories and characters emerge from that act of creating. It's essential for our students, our student teachers, to not only be, you know, develop their range of artists and artworks that they can kind of use as inspiration for children. They also need to experience the process of making and doing. They need to, first of all, engage and understand with the learning potential of taking children outdoors. They need to overcome their own resistance to that. And also they need to connect with their inner child and enjoy it, so that their children will enjoy it when they actually begin teaching. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Thank you. So the practical session within which students explore art in the outdoors sits within the creativity in the arts module in year 1. And just to give you a little bit of context, typically the majority of our students joining the programme have not really studied or experienced art beyond year 9. And they often have very firm preconceptions about what it entails, and often express quite a firm belief that in order to be good at art, inverted commas, you've got to be good at drawing. So, and it's a source of anxiety for students. So the module in its entirety sort of aims to dispel this myth and attempts to nurture their enthusiasm and particularly their confidence with art. And we want them to become excited about doing art themselves, and ultimately teaching it. So we want them to become aware that there's a wide range of different ways to approach it. Practically in school, it's not just about drawing. Yes, it is about drawing, but it's not only about drawing. So it's about kind of giving them other ways in that they may feel more confident about. And to do this, the module as a whole introduces an eclectic range of artists, different media, different techniques, and also shows how art can be purposely linked to other subjects to enrich them. So introducing this outdoor art early in the programme, in the module, is important. It helps dispel these preconceptions of what art can be or what it is. And working outside with natural materials, exploring the environment, using their senses, responding imaginatively to their surroundings, introduces also that there's although an outcome is often what we're looking for, especially in school, it's often the process, the playing with ideas, the talking whilst making that happens when you're outside, where the learning actually occurs. And this can be both empowering and very liberating in terms of what our students expect art to be, and they come to enjoy it. It's also a very experiential and practical example of how you make these real connections between art and the other subjects. Could be, in this case, particularly English, but also geography, science, in terms of how you kind of develop those activities. And they work collaboratively. So they work in small groups, which is a deliberate sort of supportive pedagogy in these early stages of the programme and their introduction to art. And it encourages the exchange of ideas, playful experimentation, and it dispels that other myth that is art is an individual creative process. It can also be a collective one. Okay, thank you.
Next slide.
Yeah, and it's over to you, Victoria, I think, to
Yeah, so these
about
demonstrate exactly what Fiona's been talking about, and the mushroom metaphor comes up again. This is a group that went outside, having looked at some of the art you've just seen, and were encouraged to explore and maybe find, using Aboriginal art, which takes something from the natural environment and stories with it. The storying being a hugely powerful element of Aboriginal culture, Australian Aboriginal art. So out they go, and this is a piece of text from them. What's that? Are they mushrooms? Is it a mushroom? Pick one up, pick him up. He's instantly become him. Give him eyes, give him little sticks for arms, tuck him up in a leaf. He looks lovely. Where's his family? We're not making a family as well. But then the person who asked, where's his family, mutters to herself, they can come tomorrow. So becoming engrossed, just as children do in their play, is a really important part of what Fiona was describing in terms of building confidence and joy in art making. And you can see on the right where this might go in terms of the student portfolio, taking photographs of what they made, reflecting on how that might happen with children when they're in the classroom as teachers, and then actually pushing that a little further with what kind of poetry making might link with that, so you can see the obvious curriculum connections. Next slide. Here again, 2 student portfolios, which is, by the way, how they are assessed, and showing the influence of both Richard Long and Andy Goldsworthy with that lovely leaf pattern, with the poem they created actually forming the circles. So you can see the kinds of eco metaphors that occur quite naturally in the students' making as well. And on the right, a really different approach, doing rubbings from leaves. And here's a really lovely example, I think, of a student who may not be particularly confident in drawing, or may not have considered themselves as a particularly good drawer, but who is really engaged with the idea of journeying and the process as part of art making, which actually gets this student closer to the processes of Richard Long and Andy Goldsworthy than doing a perfect drawing would. So something in the way that Fiona has to assess the work, links to that, links very strongly to the idea that the processes here, which are kind of speculative and really are like those mushroom opportunistic investigations, becoming thoroughly engrossed, merging, as it were, with the fungi and with what happens and what matters outdoors, can actually be manifest in their assessed work. Next slide. So finally, in terms of the art, here's what the students think of it. Here's a poem on the right, linked to a piece of work made outside. Walking through a soft wind on my skin, a kind warm, the colour of fresh green, but around me, a leaf pool. Next slide.
Okay, I'm going to provide some context on the primary national curriculum and the balance between core and foundation subjects. So thinking back to 2008, Boys and Spink had noted that with the pressures of statutory testing and school accountability in core subjects, teaching time had been narrowly focused on English and mathematics rather than recognising the potential of foundation subjects, particularly humanities and arts, which they asserted were the most powerful, most meaningful, and most relevant areas of learning. With the introduction of the national curriculum and the subsequent revisions, there are now 13 primary subjects, resulting in a squeezing of the school timetable and some subjects being lost in topic work while others are prioritised. There's been a continued focus on statutory testing in core subjects with the introduction of the phonics screening check in Year 1 and times table testing in Key Stage 2, which arguably has exacerbated the issue. In an article in Impact magazine in 2019, Odin Gatling voiced the concerns of the teaching profession that the curriculum was unbalanced and unmotivating for children, and that Ofsted, in its own school inspection handbook, was guiding inspectors to ensure that schools provide a broad and balanced curriculum at Key Stage 2. However, in Key Stage 1, their focus should be on whether children could read, write, and use mathematical knowledge. Next slide, please. This narrowing of the curriculum has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. With the return of pupils to schools and the subsequent reintroduction of statutory testing, Ofsted's report, Education Recovery in Schools 2022, noted that there was a lag in schools in ensuring that children had access to enriching experiences, because school leaders were focused on attainment in core subjects, tutoring and catch-up sessions, rather than on pupils' broader personal development. In the same year, the research by Salway et al. Compared physical activity before and after lockdown, which showed us that children are now more sedentary, so less physically active than before. A long overdue review of the curriculum is now needed, we would argue, that can provide children with rich, varied and meaningful learning experiences that embrace eco-pedagogies and take them beyond the confines of the classroom. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Michaela. So I'm going to show you a visual map of what we show to our students to introduce the concept of interdisciplinarity. So we give them a definition, and that we inform them that it's a research strategy that crosses disciplinary boundaries to create a holistic approach. At this stage, they are still unsure of what that means. So we start from the bottom layer, from the disciplinary approach, where subjects are taught discretely and separately. For example, phonics. Phonics is usually taught discretely. And then the next layer up is multidisciplinary, or as we call it, cross-curricular approach, where there are links between subjects and students are encouraged to make links. And this is the approach that they see at school the most. For example, schools often have topic, and then they make cross-curricular links between subjects during that topic. So we explain to them that at this level, the third level from the bottom, the subject boundaries begin to get blurred, and at this stage they say they really understand. So the subjects are still there, and I'll show you on the next slide where the subjects are. We have to teach them, they're part of the national curriculum, curriculum, but they start thinking at a high level. They start thinking from a concept level, and then they start thinking how they can fit the subjects in into a particular concept. So this is the map that we show them, and we do not go to this one, the top one, transdisciplinary, because we haven't applied it yet, but that's where the subject boundaries are gone. There are no subject boundaries. It's just knowledge, universal knowledge. But we stop here at Middlesex, we stop here at this level. So I'm going to show you a map that we do with them, and this is how they form their assignments. So it's a three-layered interdisciplinary map. So I mentioned the word concept. So our trainees think of a concept first. That's the first layer that goes in the middle. And examples of some concepts are maybe migration, survival, waste, river. Our River Week is very popular. That's a true interdisciplinary concept. Maybe play. And we ask them to think at an abstract level, to use play, for example, rather than toys. Toys are quite concrete objects. So we ask them to think of an abstract object. So they usually come up with some really, really good ideas. And waste was very popular this year. I suppose that was the result of our No Planet B week and all the activities that we did. So this is just the first layer with the year group. They choose a year group that they will work in and the concept. Then the second layer, you can see there are no subjects here. They think of all the activities and knowledge, skills, connections that they can do with their topic. So for example, with the topics of waste, they will watch videos, they will create collage of waste, they will go to a local recycling center, see where waste goes, they will create their own songs, they will then at the end perform in an assembly for parents on the last day of the week. So the whole week is based around waste in different levels, but the second level is all about knowledge, skills, and connections. And finally, in the third outside layers, we have curriculum mapping and subjects come alive here. So for every single one of the activity, they need to include at least one or two subject links. So if you have topic like waste, there will be lots of subjects. They are mainly, we encourage them to use humanities and arts. And there is a lot of geography, art, DT, science, RE, citizenship, music. We encourage them to use music, but of course they can make links with the core subjects if they are relevant, but the focus is on humanities and arts, just to encourage these foundation subjects because we are very keen on them. So that is our final layer where the subjects are finally together. They come together in that final layer. And when they produce their maps, they're very visual, they are very attractive, they have some fantastic ideas, and I'll be honest with you, it's just an absolute pleasure, a joy to mark them. Marking is very enjoyable. Okay, thank you.
Apologies, I've been muted for so long, waiting my turn. Thank you, Adina. As Adina has described, we have interdisciplinarity running through our work in the primary education team. And as a team, we are strongly influenced by theorists of engaged pedagogy, such as Paulo Freire and Bell Hooks. Hooks suggests that it's our estrangement from the natural environment that provides the cultural context for violence against the earth. And as Scoffham and Rawlinson point out in their book about sustainability education, it's the students in our university and the pupils they will be teaching in schools eventually who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. And so it is them that will need the wisdom and the humility to develop strategies to combat environmental crises. So we're now moving specifically into our discussion of this week that we work on with our students that addresses climate emergency and crisis through these interdisciplinary eco-pedagogies. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Clay. So I'm going to show you a couple of definitions of eco-pedagogy and what this word actually means. This term, eco-pedagogy, grew out of discussions at the Second Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It took place in 1992, and it was heavily influenced by the philosopher and educator Paulo Freire. And you can see here the definition by Ms. Jacek from 2020, who describes eco-pedagogy as teaching to understand the social aspect of environmental issues. And he goes from local to global perspectives, as well as through the scholarship of multiple disciplines. And he suggests that it's essential to determine actions for lasting changes towards environmental well-being and planetary sustainability. And then more recently, we had Bayer and Bird Finley. They describe eco-pedagogies as creative approaches that educators across multiple disciplines use to empower students to access and engage with nature. So we have this triple planetary crisis. Here is the diagram from the United Nations. So feel free later on to click on this link and see what this is about. But in response to this crisis, it's a triple crisis on climate change, water stress, and biodiversity loss. Our team working at primary education at Middlesex, we have devised an interdisciplinary curriculum model working across a number of topic themes. And over many years, this didn't take place overnight. It took many years, and we have developed a curriculum specifically for teacher education that values interdisciplinarity and the arts, and it approaches the topic in non-linear thematic way, taking the model from what happens in primary schools, where they have their topic work projects, and all teachers are expected to work both within and outside their subject specialisms. For example, on topics such as No Planet B. We tutors at Middlesex in our primary team, we all teach during this week, and we teach beyond our subject specialism. And again, it's a very, very enjoyable week where everybody teaches everything and we plan everything together. And both BA and PGCE students are expected to work with are allocated a themed week during which they work collaboratively in groups, and that is intentional. And they develop presentations which explore how to enhance children's learning through these creative cross-curricular planning and taking learning beyond the classroom.
So thinking about a good stimulus and why we might use a picture book is really important. There are millions of reasons why picture books are a great stimulus to use in all forms of education, not just in primary. But in the way we're looking at in this particular types of activities, there's some really strong links that we can make. And one of them in particular is that ability for a text to be used as almost like a window into a wider world, as Lung and Adam Whitaker talk about. And it's that opportunity for the children to sit almost sort of outside of the text, but then they can actually see the stimulus of the images, the situations, and to help start to develop an understanding and lead into a discussion point. It also is that idea that you might be able to actually get children to think about a topic and have an openness towards a topic. A picture book is a very good stimulus in terms of showing those images, showing those details, but at the same time, allowing the children to come up with their own thoughts and not to be guided so much that they have to follow something. They've got that openness that they can use. And one thing in particular that is really useful is the work from Craft in 2015, who particularly talks about allowing children to see, explore, and challenge a range of issues and create what is referred to as possibility thinking. So it's developing those thinking skills that they might be able to use to create those discussions that they have. And picture books can be a really good way into all of these different aspects. If you could go on to the next slide for me. This is the picture book that we particularly have used, Miranda Paul's One Plastic Bag. If you haven't seen this text before, then please do ask us for us to show you the text, but also have a look, because it's a really good resource. It's used in lots of schools as well. And one of the things that this text particularly does is it creates that opportunity to spark action beyond the classroom. It sort of gives that idea of empowerment through a relatively simple story. So we use this as part of our No Planet B work that we do with our students. So we look at a way to explore imaginative ways of recycled materials, reducing plastic pollution, and thinking about this linking to their experiences as primary teacher. It is a lovely story. It tells us about a young Gambian woman who cleans up her local community when discarded plastic bags become an environmental and health problem in the village. She turns these plastic bags into plastic purses that are then sold on, and she reduces plastic waste at the same time as selling these on. So with the help of others, she's able to transform her community and shows that everyone can make a difference. So it can really act as that stimulus to get the children to think, to spark that idea, that creative thinking that they will bring in. There is a number of texts, and this one particularly works well in terms of that illuminating environmental issues, having those connections between eco-pedagogies and social justice at the same time as thinking about environmental health. And it's also that type of text that will create such a good discussion with children, and you can actually use many examples through our work we do with our students, but also them bringing that into their own experiences in the classroom as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So in the session where the students are first introduced to the picture book, One Plastic Bag, they have the story read to them by the tutor. And they also explore Elizabeth Zunon's very clever illustrations, which are collaged out of folded traditional West African fabrics, plastic and paper bags. And then the students are showing some frankly horrifying facts reflected here, facts about the scale of plastic bag pollution worldwide. Asked which of these facts shocked them or they didn't know about already, they react with absolute horror to the idea of finding 5.9 kilos of plastic inside a dead whale. They consider how unfathomably enormous the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is, and they lament how little plastic is actually recycled. They also contribute their personal experiences of recycling or waste practices, both at the university and local to where they live. With primary learners, ways forward and optimistic forms of eco-pedagogy are absolutely vital. Tutors go on to introduce initiatives from around the world, such as tourist boats that net rubbish in the canals of Amsterdam, gathering plastic waste that then gets recycled into more boats. Also a research project from Sheffield University, where mattresses are repurposed for plant growing in refugee camps, and plastic recycled into bricks for school buildings. Student teachers note from these examples that Western research is important, but it's that local contextualization that's key. It was only once an Indigenous farmer took up the new mattress system of growing, for example, that caused other local growers to follow suit. And this makes an important contextual adaptation. These important moments of meta-teaching occur where the tutor is able to remind the teacher education students to tease out those nuances of collaborative rather than colonial models, when they in turn are teaching this to children in school later. Thank you. Next slide, please. Students then have the opportunity to get creative. They work in groups for about 20 minutes to imagine their own initiatives for repurposing waste products. Then they get to pitch their ideas to the rest of the class in 2 minutes. They come up with amazing ideas. Flip-flops made from car tires, water bottles transformed into transparent exam pen pots, makeup packaging, this is my favorite, turned into pen casings, which they imaginatively then name Repent. I love that, need to market it. Compostable coffee cups made from coffee grounds. There was one idea which I heard about in one of these sessions for eco-friendly smartphones made of bamboo, cork and recycled plastic. And I felt inspired to remark, if phone design companies aren't already doing this, then they jolly well should be. And unanimously, the students agreed with me. Thank you. Next slide, please.
So the next session we'll be talking about is called Local Environmental Walk, Taking Action. This is where our students, they go for a walk around the area and they stay in Hendon. They stay very close to our university and they identify an environmental concern or an issue in the area. Their task is then to take photos, to think about this issue, and then to champion a solution that they feel would create a positive and sustainable change in their local community. And that change also has to improve the well-being of local residents. Then they present the solution to their peers and tutors. So they always comment how clean and lovely our campus is, but as soon as they go away, slightly away, you will probably recognize some of these pictures. This is very close to campus. They've recognized litter as an issue, and they have suggested lots of lovely suggestions, but they always come back fired up and inspired, and they always say, we really need to take some action and we need to teach our children to take some action. And this activity is supported by McLeod et al., who observed that children need to develop ecological awareness and be confident enough to express their environmental concerns. So this is really, really important skill that we need to teach them. And this in turn will encourage them to take creative and social action. And as we've heard before, they are our future leaders, so they need to be equipped with necessary skills. And another activity that we do, this is supported by Khan, and it encourages critical thinking for citizenship. Khan says that the main purpose of eco-pedagogy is to educate children to engage with the difficulties they face in today's world with action and creativity and dialogue in order to move towards sustainable growth. We've spoken about this already, based on respect for nature and the rights of all, and justice and a culture of peace. So Khan proposes that eco-pedagogy should focus on critical thinking to promote active and responsible citizenship, and suggests that they are the only route to decolonize and sustainable future for our education. So our students at Middlesex, they put this in practice by analyzing and creating protest speeches, protest songs and artwork, and they use their creativity and dialogue to be heard, and in turn to allow their pupils to be heard. And the image here that you can see shows a selection of banners. This session is actually called Banner. And these banners are created and displayed with enormous passion by students towards the end of the No Planet B week as part of their presentation.
Thank you, Adina. So the One Plastic Bag session leads well into the following week's unit, which is all about pattern. One of the follow-up sessions is called Knit One, Purl One, Pattern with a Purpose. And this has been created as a direct result of working with this book. The students learn about the history, the purposes, and the benefits of knitting, why it is also a good activity to do with children. They create a knitting or crochet pattern, and they learn how to make and use plarn, which is a term used for plastic yarn made from strips of plastic bags, as in the book. Many students found learning to knit for the first time quite challenging, but they did persevere through the session. And this activity promoted the development of fine motor skills. As students manipulated the yarn and needles, they refined their hand-eye coordination as well as their dexterity, and they learned a new skill, which many were quite pleased with. One student was overheard to remark, "This is the most frustrating yet oddly satisfying session I have experienced." They persevered, as I said, through the activity and carried on. And then through the knitting and crochet, they were able to relate directly to Isato and the story, and her achievements in creating something worthwhile, and that sense of satisfaction for them as well when they'd created something. The students also explored the possibility of knitting with objects other than standard needles, such as pencils, chopsticks, which encourages them to think more creatively about using everyday objects in their classes, particularly if they're setting up a knitting club and resources in the school are limited. So they don't have to go out and purchase lots of woolen needles. They can use other resources. During the session, attention is drawn in particular to how the stitches are made and how the combinations of stitches, just simple stitches, can produce really intricate patterns. And they're shown examples of knitting from all over the world and the cultural stories behind those. So they also make links to mathematics and the fact that mathematics is part of everything we do. Students are encouraged to create their own simple designs and have a go at knitting these as a follow-up task. Next slide, please. Lost mine. So it's important for students to understand the role of mathematics for sustainability. It's difficult to see climate change, so we use mathematics as a tool for understanding it. Pupils should engage with it authentically through the tasks they encounter in the classroom. So in other words, problems about climate change should be relevant in their lives and involve local issues and use real data as much as possible. So they also should have their own ideas as central to the tasks that they're being introduced to. So for example, maybe completing a local traffic survey to find out what the traffic is like in their area, linking to pollution, and then possibly maybe an activity on finding out the temperature on their birthday and looking at changes over time and seeing the impact of that. Pupils should also be encouraged to be active participants in mathematics. So in other words, actually collecting the data rather than just using data that's already created, and working collaboratively as part of their school or local community. So when they're considering what area to focus on and what data sets to collect, they should be actively making those decisions. And then the whole idea of critical maths education is that pupils need to understand the role of mathematics in shaping their society and their lives, as well as the role of mathematics in understanding problems like climate change, for example. They should have opportunity to reflect on how mathematics is useful, so how it can be used to put forward those arguments. Not, you hear lots of arguments against, from critics, but also the arguments for why we should be actively engaged in addressing these issues. But they also need to reflect on its limitations. So although mathematics can provide us with information to help us identify what the problems are, they don't always provide the solutions. So it's up to us as individuals and as communities to work on that. But pupils need to know what the limitations are. They also should be provided with opportunity to take action by asking what-if questions. And we've talked about earlier on the idea of being, active participants in their own communities. So getting them to or asking them what-if questions enables them to take on that role. Next slide, please. So the question we want to ask is, what's the impact on our beginner teachers' practice? So, when we teach them through this module, what do we then expect them to do? What does it mean in reality for our student teachers going into schools? So we want them to explore ways that they and their pupils can develop ecological awareness. We also want to develop their understanding of the social aspects of environmental issues from local, as we said, right the way through to global perspectives. We also want them to have a voice with regard to environmental concerns and, raising that voice. And then we also want them to educate our children to engage with the difficulties they face in today's world. And it's not just about, we have to be careful that children, are not becoming anxious about what they see, but it's about making them aware that they can make changes as well. And then taking creative and social action, but also understanding the role other subjects play in raising and addressing environmental concerns, particularly with relation to mathematics. And you'll see some quotes there that we have from our students on what they've learned and the benefits they feel with regard to what they will do when they go into class. And it's really important that we train our students in this respect, particularly when you think that the DFE's requirement for 2025 is that all schools will have a sustainability lead. So our students, hopefully going into schools, will be in a good position to take on that role. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Anne. So to summarise, picture books like One Plastic Bag reveal litter as an actant. Latour's use of the term is that an actant is a source of action that can be either human or non-human. It's that which has efficacy. It can do things, make a difference, produce effects, and alter the course of events. Plastic encountered as litter works as an actant to begin a conversation on plastic pollution, exposing the entangled relational nature of everyday material life. The repeat litter in one plastic bag is an actant for the character Issatu Cisse. It prompted her to take action. It was an actant for Miranda Paul to write the book. And it's an actant for us, the primary education team, and for our students and their future pupils to begin that conversation about plastic pollution and move towards the sustainable growth based on respect for nature, the rights of all, justice, and the culture of peace, as described by Khan. Beyond the story, litter is an actant for better understanding of eco-initiatives in the Global South, which comes to matter as what Taylor and others describe here as globally mobile actant in the planetary emergency. I'm going to ask Adina to pop our references up for your perusal while we invite you to ask us any questions that you might have.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Many thanks, Anne, Philip, Claire, Edina, Victoria, Michaela, and Fiona for this very inspiring talk. So the idea of playing with the elements, which will be, of course, liberating for the children, but of course for the teachers themselves too. So teaching as a collective process, which of course in this case will definitely mean learning from the teachers, but also teachers learning from the children. I found all of this, very exciting indeed, especially the focus that you put on being an activist, on taking action. So that's a very important part, as you know, of eco-pedagogy, teaching children this as well. And so it's a very exciting indeed, and many thanks for your talk. Now we have 5 minutes only, I'm afraid, for questions. There are some comments in particular here rather than questions, I understand. So there's Mona says that she never so strongly wanted to be a primary school teacher than in engaging with this presentation. So I can only agree with her, of course. And also, Jane says that it's a very inspiring collaborative approach of working collectively to create a genuinely exciting political approach.
Should we go with the questions, Avela?
Yes, I just tried to see if there's any question here. Yeah. Okay, is there any question?
You've got Jane, Victoria, Nathan.
There are mainly comments. I don't know if someone wants to.
I'll go. I've got quite a few questions. Yes. I'll just do the one that's on the top of my list, given the time. So just going back, it was fantastic. It just makes me realise how boring much of what I do is. It was really interesting. And thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering right at the very beginning, when you are taking the students out and you're doing the business of eco-pedagogies, whether you use that as a vehicle to problematize the nature-culture distinction. Because, for instance, if you're taking them to a local park or a local wood or whatever it is, they are artifacts of culture as much as they are of nature, because they're permitted to exist and grown specifically for that purpose, as part of our attitudes to what urban spaces in particular should look at. So I was wondering whether you can use those eco-pedagogies to just probe and challenge that binary, maybe.
Well, Fiona can probably obviously think of more probably, but for me, I feel like the fronting up of artists like Andy Goldsworthy and Richard Long immediately fronts up the idea of tensions of nature culture. So both artists are really interested not just in completely wild environments, but also the built environment, the very tiny space, you know, the incidental, where nature culture is sort of at tension perhaps with one another. So they've both made really interesting pieces of work in different contexts that kind of address that. And because both of them take such a, if you like, a spiritual stroke geographical position in their art, they operate as a kind of model for students to really take each of the spaces very seriously, culturally, as well as naturally, if you see what I mean, so that they are to think with and to be moved by and to consider what else is there, and why the other things, other relationships are there. So I think they operate as a very powerful model. They're really good artists. I'm sure Fiona would agree, because she she put them in place. And for me, they work really powerfully. It is two white men, which is a shame, but at the same time, the way they approach their work absolutely has that philosophical premise.
Thank you, Victoria.
Great. I think there's a question from Jane, I understand. Jane?
Just finding my mute button. Just a huge thank you, as I said in the comments. I think it is really inspiring, and I think it really illustrates what is possible to do in terms of research when it's very closely related to our practice. And I think it's just a plea, really. I think we have this sense that research is somehow completely separate to that which we do. But this pedagogical research that you've just shared with us really underscores how research is totally embedded with what we do in terms of practice. And I just urge you all to write more, to do, share this wonderful work with the world out there, and not just the world out there, Middlesex, other departments, other faculties need to know this work is going on. It's such a really fantastically powerful example of collaborative work that, as you say, is interdisciplinary, edging towards transdisciplinary, that can make a huge difference. And there's resonances elsewhere in the university, and people really need to know about this. So I think it's just an urge, really. And I think it's also an inspiration to others in the education department. We can share this video after the event, but when we think, oh, I don't have time and space and capacity to do research in my very busy timetable. No, you don't. But when you work together in this way, and then you see the sort of very strong connection between practice and research, and that, one step further to write a publication, and it does so much more than only being for you in your community of practice directly with your teachers, which is an enormous amount in and of itself. But if you just think about all the other places it can go and effects that it can have and impacts on multiple communities. Sorry, a little bit of a monologue, but I'm really excited by what you're doing, and I think it's really important, and you should shout it from the rafters.
Okay.
Great.
Could I just
comment? Sorry, please, Fiona.
Yeah, sorry, I tried to interject, but I was on mute. Following on from Victoria's comment, I just wanted to sort of add that this is exactly why we include artists' work in terms of what we introduce to the students, artists' work from a variety of different cultures that actually, and talk in detail about how they respond to place, to their sense of belonging and place, which obviously the Aboriginal art, the Nazca lines and things like that, even though that, and bring that up to date, we actually show sort of more kind of contemporary stuff as well. So it's not solely those kind of white European approaches. But also, I just wanted to quickly say, in terms of how they're interacting with space, what students tend to do to start with, oh, we can't do this because we're in a city. And so there's a lot of talk about, well, how, particularly how children relate to where they are, and they respond to where they are because they have a sense of belonging to that place, and that sort of brings their kind of cultural context to whatever it is they're actually doing. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to kind of add to what Victoria said. Hope that helps.
Okay, that's great. I think that we can now conclude this very inspiring and thoughtful seminar. I want just to...
I think Fiona's, sorry, Abel, I think Victoria's had her hand up a long time.
Victoria, okay, sorry, please.
The other Victoria.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll be very quick because I know you've come to an end. But I mean, no worries at all. No, just to say thank you, and really actually just picking up on points that have already been said, really. But I think what really struck me about this just listening to this was the beautiful coherence of it. So even though you were talking and drawing upon quite abstract ideas at time and sort of theoretical ideas, there was a real coherence to the way it came together. And I think that was partly due to the examples and the exemplification all the way through, which is just really, really helpful when you're trying to engage with research, to actually think about what you can do in practice. And I think sustainability education, there's been so many movements towards it, and they've never really taken off or been successful. And that's just sort of looking back over the last, I don't know, 40 years that I've known it in education, and it's always disappointing. And I just think now is the time, and I think this is just such a wonderful piece of work. And if you can disseminate it, particularly to schools as they're introducing the new requirements for it, to avoid it becoming a kind of routinized way of looking at it. I mean, I just wondered if you'd had any contact with schools or conversations with schools around your work. You probably haven't had chance for that yet, but hopefully next steps, because I think they would find this so helpful to see how you've done it and the way that you are introducing it to trainee teachers. And if our schools know that, then hopefully they can put that into practice as well when they have their trainees in schools and get them to talk about it. So that was really all. I don't know whether you have any glimmers of hope there or had any chances, but I hope so going forwards anyway. Thank you.
It might be a good starting point to think about writing it up as a blog for BERA, maybe. That's one way of getting it out there for wider school audiences, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, we have plans, and I absolutely agree that we need to think about CPD. We need to think about getting that message to schools. We've got a lovely colleague coming to visit us from Canada who belongs to an enormous network, and we're hoping that we can pass on what we've learned for these teaching modules onto that network as well and become part of it ourselves. So yeah, I agree. It hasn't really taken off, but I think we can make it take off, can't we, team?
Yeah.
I'd also like to add, Tremaine is not here. He had to go to school.
Just gone, yeah.
Tremaine is organizing a sustainability conference on the 2nd of July. We will present then, and schools will be invited.
Wouldn't be invited,
so
yeah.
Schools will be invited. So that's.
I mean, one possible thing next year to do would be to do a special partnership steering group on it, because we are having a meeting on campus, and it might be a nice way to launch the steering group next year, if that would be possible, even if it's just a shorter version of this, because we only have an hour and a half meeting, but that would be great at a starting point. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Many thanks again to you all. I want just to remind you that our next session will be with Dr. Mona Sack on the 24th of June for the Difficult Dialogues track. And the title of the seminar is Contentions in Baby Room leadership. So see you then, and have a good day, you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.